I'll check the use names list and then read the story. Names to avoid: Claire, Nora, Lily, Danny, George, Maggie, Carol, Jade, Ray, Preston, Arthur, Tessa, Serena, Robert, Derek, Biscuit. New characters: Vivian, narrator, fiancé Marcus, his parents Edmund and Helen, sister Brooke, colleague Simone. I ride my bike everywhere. That's the first thing people notice about me, and usually the last thing they expect. A woman in paint-splattered overalls, a canvas tote hanging off one handlebar, arriving at meetings in downtown Austin sweaty and slightly out of breath. I have a helmet with a crack in the back that I keep meaning to replace. I never do. What they don't know, what most people in my life have never known, is that I own a software UX consultancy with 11 full-time employees, a minority stake in a branding firm in Nashville, and a small product design studio I started in my apartment 6 years ago that now has a waiting list 4 months long. I file taxes that would make most people's accountants faint. My accountant Simone once told me I was the only client she had who showed up to their first meeting in Birkenstocks with a hole in the left sole. I am not embarrassed by any of this. But I have learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that the moment people know what I'm worth on paper, something shifts. The way they look at me changes. The way they listen changes. Suddenly my opinions carry more weight. Suddenly I'm invited to things. Suddenly I matter in a way I didn't 5 minutes before. I hate that. I have hated it since I was 23 and watched a man at a networking dinner completely dismiss everything I said until he heard who my first client was. Then he laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny and handed me his card with both hands like it was an offering. So I made a decision, quietly, years ago. I would not announce myself. Not until I was sure. Marcus knew I was a designer. He knew I freelanced, knew I worked from home some days and from coffee shops others, knew I had a few clients and that things were going well. He never pushed. That was one of the things I loved about him. He asked about my work because he was curious about what I was making, not about what I was making. We talked about color theory once for 2 hours over terrible Thai food and he didn't check his phone once. We'd been together 14 months when he told me his parents wanted to meet me. He said it carefully, the way you might tell someone the dentist called. They're not. He started, then stopped. Started again. They have a way of being. You'll see. Just don't let them rattle you. I asked what he meant by that. He looked at the wall for a moment. My father made a lot of money in commercial real estate. My mother sits on 3 nonprofit boards and considers that a career. They have opinions about what things should look like, what people should look like. And what do I look like to them? He was quiet for just a beat too long. Someone I love, he said finally. But his jaw was tight when he said it. That night I lay in bed thinking about that pause. That small, honest pause. And I made a decision. I was not going to walk into that house as myself, not the full version. I was going to walk in as exactly what I looked like. A freelance designer, scrappy and independent who loved their son. And I was going to watch what happened, not to trap them. I want to be clear about that even now, because I've turned it over in my mind many times since. I wasn't trying to manufacture a moment of humiliation. I genuinely wanted to know. Because I was thinking about marrying their son. And I needed to know what kind of people I was marrying into. Not the performance they'd put on for a future daughter-in-law they'd looked up online. The real thing. I told Marcus I had nothing to wear to a nice dinner, which was technically true and that I had nothing I was willing to wear. He offered to take me shopping and I said no, I'd figure something out. He looked a little nervous but didn't argue. The day of the dinner I put on dark jeans, clean but well worn at the knees. A plain white button-down I'd had since grad school, and white canvas sneakers. My bag was my everyday canvas tote, the one with the broken inside pocket I'd been safety pinning shut for 2 years. I pulled my hair into a low bun and put on small gold hoops, the cheap kind, and a little mascara. I looked like myself. Comfortable, practical, unimpressive. Marcus picked me up and looked at my outfit for a moment before he looked at my face. You look nice, he said. You were going to say something else. No, a pause. My mother might, she dresses for dinner, even at home. I don't own anything like that right now, I said. Which was true. Everything I owned that would have qualified was at the dry cleaner, which I had arranged on purpose. He nodded. I could see him recalibrating internally. To his credit, he reached over and squeezed my hand and didn't say another word about it. His parents lived in Westlake Hills, west of Austin, where the roads curve up into limestone hills and the houses sit back from the street behind old oak trees and long driveways. The kind of neighborhood where even the mailboxes look expensive. We pulled up to a house that was large and deliberately understated in the way that very expensive things sometimes are. Pale stone, clean lines, black window frames, a front garden that looked like it had been designed and not just planted. Marcus's mother met us at the door. She was a tall woman in her early 60s, silver-haired and a linen blazer the color of sand. She had the posture of someone who had been told to stand up straight for 60 years and had eventually internalized it completely. She kissed Marcus on the cheek and then turned to me with a smile that arrived precisely on schedule. "You must be Vivian," she said. "We've heard so much." I doubted that. She led us through a foyer that had actual art on the walls, not prints, originals, some of them quite good, into a living room where Marcus's father was standing with a drink, looking out at the back garden through floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a broad man, silver at the temples, wearing a collared shirt and sport coat like he'd come from somewhere important and hadn't quite finished unwinding. He turned and assessed me in approximately 3 seconds. I felt it. That particular sweep. Not rude exactly, but not subtle either. Taking inventory. "So," he said after we'd done the handshake, "Marcus tells us you're a designer." "I am," I said. "Freelance?" "Mostly." He nodded in a way that didn't mean yes. "Interesting field." "Competitive." "It can be." His mother handed me a glass of sparkling water I hadn't asked for and gestured toward the living room. "Come sit. Dinner's another 20 minutes. She turned to Marcus and said something about a cousin, and the two of them drifted slightly apart from us, the way parents do when they want to speak privately to their child in front of company. His father stayed with me. "What kind of design?" he asked. "UX, mostly. User experience, how products feel to use. The interface, the flow, the logic of it. Digital stuff." "Yes, good market for that right now," he said in the tone of someone conceding a minor point. "Though I imagine it's hard to build something stable. Clients come and go." "Mine tend to stay," I said. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "That's the goal, isn't it?" His wife reappeared. "Edmund, stop interrogating her." She said it warmly, which made it worse somehow. "Vivian, ignore him. He does this with everyone." "I don't mind," I said. And I didn't. I was paying attention. Dinner was in a formal dining room that seated 12 and was set for 4. The table had flowers from what I guessed was their own garden, and the food had been catered. Small dishes, beautifully plated. The kind of meal that costs more than it looks. Marcus's mother talked about a benefit she was organizing. A new restaurant she'd tried in Dallas. A friend who had just sold a house on Lake Travis for an amount she mentioned casually and watching for my reaction. I didn't give her one. His father asked about my family. I told them my mother taught middle school English in San Marcos for 28 years before she retired, that my father had worked for a municipal water utility, that I'd been the first in my family to get a graduate degree. I watched something flicker in his father's expression. Not cruelty. Something more like confirmation, a theory settling into place. "That's wonderful," his mother said. "Really, it must have taken so much determination to build something on your own, coming from, well, from more modest circumstances." There it was, coming from more modest circumstances, said with the particular warmth of someone who believed that being kind about it was the same as not saying it at all. "It did take determination," I said. "Still does." She nodded encouragingly. "And Marcus says you've been doing this, the freelancing, for about 6 years now?" "About that, and it's sustainable? I mean, you're able to..." She laughed softly. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to pry. I just worry, you know how mothers are?" She wasn't worried about me. She was establishing something. I understood that. I manage, I said. Marcus was looking at the tablecloth. His father leaned back in his chair. I'll be honest with you, Vivian. I like people who are direct. Marcus knows that. He glanced at his son. We just want to know he's with someone who's practical, stable. Design is wonderful, but passion doesn't pay the mortgage. That's true, I said. And freelancing? He shook his head slightly. It's not the same as having something real. Something you've built. Security. I took a sip of water. What does security look like to you? He looked mildly surprised that I'd asked. Assets? Equity. Something with your name on it. I agree, I said. And then I said nothing else. He waited for me to elaborate. I didn't. His mother tried to redirect the conversation to a neighbor who'd just returned from Portugal. I let her. I ate my food, I was pleasant and curious and asked genuine questions about their lives. I laughed at the right moments. I didn't take the bait when his father circled back twice more with variations on the same theme about stability, about plans, about whether Marcus and I had talked about the practical stuff. At some point his mother excused herself to check on dessert and his father's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and something on the screen made him go very still. He looked up at me, then back at the phone, then at me again. The expression on his face was one I had seen before and hoped never to produce in someone, because it is not a flattering look. It is the look of a person rapidly revising a story they'd already finished writing. The color had shifted in his face slightly. Vivian, he said slowly, what's your last name again? Hale, I said. He set his phone down on the table, face up, and I could see from where I sat that he'd been looking at a LinkedIn profile. Mine, presumably. Or possibly the Austin Business Journal piece from last spring that my publicist had insisted on and I'd mostly forgotten about. Hale Design Group, he said. Yes, that's. He stopped. You're that Vivian Hale. I'm the only one I know of. Marcus looked up from his plate. His father's expression was doing something complicated. The Hale Design Group that worked on the Meridian app launch? That's been in every tech publication for the past year? We led the UX on that, yes. Silence. And you also, he picked up his phone again, scrolling. You have a stake in Northland Branding? A minority stake. My business partner runs the day-to-day. He put the phone down again. The silence stretched out in a way that was not entirely comfortable. His mother came back from the kitchen carrying a small plate of something chocolate, and she read the room before she sat down. She looked at her husband, then at me, then at her son. Did I miss something? Her husband let out a slow breath. Vivian runs a company, he said. A few of them, actually. Oh? She set the plate down carefully. I design things, I said. I've been doing it for a while. Another silence. Then Marcus's father looked at me with an expression I hadn't expected. Not embarrassment, exactly. Something more like assessment, recalibrated. You let us, he stopped. Chose his words. You let us make assumptions. I answered every question you asked me, I said. Honestly, that landed. I could see it land. He picked up his wine glass, though he didn't drink from it. Why? And here's the part I have told and retold, the part I've turned over and examined from every angle, because I want to be honest about it. I didn't do it to embarrass them. I didn't do it for some cinematic moment of triumph. I did it because I loved their son, and I needed to know whether the people he came from were capable of seeing past the surface of a thing, to whatever was underneath. Because I was going to spend the rest of my life at your dinner table, I said. And I wanted to know what it was like before I agreed to it. His mother sat down very slowly. I have money, I said. I have more of it than most people I know. And it changes how people treat me when they find out. It changes what they say and what they don't say and what they think I'm worth. I didn't want that with you. I wanted to see. I paused. I wanted to know if I was welcome here as a person, not as an asset. Marcus's father looked at me for a long moment. He wasn't a stupid man. I'd seen that from the beginning. He was a man who had built his life on reading situations quickly and correctly, and he had misread this one, and he knew it. That's fair, he said finally. His voice was different. Something had gone out of it. Not his confidence. Something else. some particular kind of carelessness that I suspect he'd carried for a long time without noticing it. His mother reached across the table and put her hand briefly over mine. "I said some things tonight," she said, "that I would like to take back." "You don't have to." "I want to." She looked at me steadily. "I think I was measuring you against things that don't actually matter. And I'd like the chance to start over." I looked at Marcus. He had been so quiet through all of it. Now he looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read, part relief, part something that looked like apology, part something that looked like wonder. "You could have told me," he said. "I know. Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, because you never asked what I was worth. You only ever asked what I was working on, and that was, I stalked. That felt like the realest thing anyone had offered me in a long time. I didn't want to change it. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, once, slowly. We stayed another hour. His father asked real questions that time, about the Meridian project, about how I'd structured my first company, about what I'd gotten wrong in the early years. He listened like he was actually listening. His mother asked about my mother, the retired teacher, and seemed genuinely interested in the answer. It wasn't a transformation. I'm not going to tell you that one dinner changed everything, because that's not how people work, but something had shifted. Some layer of performance had been dropped, and what was underneath it was, actually, people I could talk to. People who were capable of adjustment. On the drive home, Marcus was quiet for a long time. "Were you nervous?" he asked eventually. "A little," I said. "It didn't show." "It wasn't the most important part," I said. He drove for another mile. The limestone hills were dark on either side of the road, the city lights beginning to spread out in front of us, that particular Austin sprawl of light across the valley. "You know," he said, "you're the most interesting person I've ever met. You should have led with that." He laughed, really laughed, for the first time all evening, and the sound of it filled the car and made the whole night feel smaller and more manageable than it had. I am not a woman who needs approval. I spent a long time learning how not to need it, and I don't think that's something I'll unlearn. But there's a difference between not needing approval and not caring at all. And that night, sitting in Marcus's car watching the city come into view, I let myself care. Just a little. Just enough. The dinner was 3 months ago. His parents invited us back for Thanksgiving. His mother texted me separately to ask if I had any dietary restrictions, and then, almost as an afterthought, added, "I really am glad you came that night." The first time. I typed back, "Me too," and I meant it. Not because of how it ended, but because now I knew, and knowing, for me, has always been worth more than any particular answer. I have thought about that dinner more times than I can count. Not the reveal. Not the moment Edmund's face went still when he saw my name on his phone screen. That part I barely remember clearly anymore. What I remember is the drive home. The dark hills on either side of the road. Mark is laughing, finally laughing, after holding his breath all evening. The city lights spreading out ahead of us like something had just opened up. There is a version of that night where I walked in and announced myself, where I wore the right dress and let them find my LinkedIn on their own time and smiled through the performance of being evaluated. And maybe that version ends fine. Maybe they approve, we have a pleasant enough Thanksgiving, and I spend the next decade never quite knowing what they actually thought of me when I had nothing to prove. I didn't want that. I have never wanted the version of acceptance that only arrives once you've demonstrated your credentials. That kind of welcome has always felt like being hired, not chosen. What I wanted was the truth, and the truth cost something. It cost me a dinner where I sat across from 2 people who were quietly, politely measuring me against a standard I hadn't agreed to. It cost Marcus an uncomfortable evening. It cost Edmund and Helen the comfortable story they'd walked into that night, the one where they already knew how it ended. But here is what I've come to understand about that kind of cost. It's the only price worth paying. Not because discomfort is noble, or because testing people is a virtue in itself. I've turned that part over many times and I know it's complicated. But because I have learned slowly that the things most worth having are usually the ones that required you to be honest about what you actually needed, Not diplomatic, not strategic, honest. Edmund didn't change because I embarrassed him. He changed, if he changed at all, because something he did that night was reflected back to him clearly, without anger, and he was smart enough and decent enough to recognize it. That's not my doing. That's his. A person who can look at themselves in an unflattering moment and say that's fair, that person had the capacity for it all along. All I did was create the conditions. Helen's text message, the one that came weeks later. I really am glad you came that night. The first time, I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen. Not because it vindicated me, because it was real, because it cost her something small to send it, and she sent it anyway. That's the thing I keep coming back to. Not cleverness, not leverage, not the satisfaction of a reveal. Just the willingness of people, when given the chance, to be a little more honest than they were the moment before. That's the only thing I was ever looking for. From them, from Marcus, from myself. I am not a woman who performs. I learned a long time ago that performance is exhausting and the applause is never for you, it's for the character you played. I would rather be known plainly in worn jeans and canvas sneakers than admired for something I dressed up to be. What happened at that dinner table was not a victory. It was a beginning, and beginnings, the real ones, always feel a little like standing in a doorway, uncertain, slightly cold, not entirely sure what you're walking into. I walked in anyway. I'd do it again.